Africa is building one of the most ambitious restoration projects the world has ever seen, a living wall of green stretching across the continent to fight desertification, restore ecosystems, and transform lives. Today on the Shades of Life podcast, we are diving into the story of the Great Green Wall. And joining me from Lomé in Togo is Tabi Joda, a passionate advocate for this movement and the communities behind it. So Tabi, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. It's my pleasure to join you.
So I've been wanting to talk to you about the Great Green Wall for a while because it is a fascinating project for outsiders, probably one of the biggest of the century, I would even say. So let's dive in. For listeners who are unfamiliar with the Great Green Wall, could you provide an overview of what it is and its primary objectives?
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Like you earlier said, it's one of the most ambitious program ever created on the planet. So I call it the world's nature wonder, because this is a vision to grow a massive scale of ecosystem services, restored lands, and rehabilitated biodiversity hubs from the west coast of Africa to the Horn of Africa, which is the size of the USA, the Europe, and perhaps Alaska, and Antarctica put together. So you can imagine that view of this mosaic of trees, that is bringing back wildlife, birds, a strong transition or stopping point for migrating birds. And just to put that into perspective, however, this vision is a novel vision created by African Union heads of states and governments in 2007 to bring back the viable ecosystems that have been lost and the biodiversity that has been depleted in the entire Sahara and the Sahel region, most especially to stop the desert from encroaching into the savanna region of Africa, and also holding these very beautiful communities to have their livelihood, actually undisturbed by a beautiful ecosystem, by beautiful lands, by beautiful landscapes, by beautiful, biodiversity products. So, for example, you are working in Africa generally in the forest, you harvest fruits from nature. You pick them from nature generally, and wildlife actually interacts with humans. But over time was a complete loss of this richness. So this vision is bringing back that connection, that intersection with humans, with nature, wildlife, and other ecosystem services. And this is something that we all on the planet cannot afford not to make it happen. Because when it happens, we will have the biggest ecosystem resources ever seen in mankind. It will help in humanitarian support. It will help in reducing the migration of young Africans who we currently see now migrating across the Sahara and the Mediterranean, some of them even dying in that Mediterranean because of the excruciating heat and the loss of viable biodiversity and ecosystem which their lives actually lies upon. So bringing this back is not only a beauty to adore, but a human solution to so many of the economic, ecological, biodiversity, and social challenges that we have been experiencing in this region of the world, the Sahel and Sahara. Just to put that in perspective, Ingrid, it is the world's biggest nature wonder. So beautiful, so amazing. Really, I can't wait for this initiative to come to a completion.
Yeah, there is so much attached to it. And I love that you're calling it a natural wonder of the world, because it really is. And it's capturing imagination, it's exciting, but as you said, there is so many parts to it, and it's also what makes it extremely interesting. And kudos to Africa for putting this together and developing this project, because it is amazing. So, Tabi, as an ambassador for the Great Green Wall, can you tell us what motivated you to take on this role, and how has your journey been so far since you've been involved?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ingrid. I think it's the same, like I said earlier. I resolved with myself, being to school does not necessarily mean that we all have to be in the offices signing documents and working on administrative activities. I felt having education was more of a commitment, or more of an obligation, a moral obligation to support, to bring prosperity to people in my own communities. And I found the Great Green Wall as a genuine solution, a genuine call, that can help exponentially a critical mass of people, women, farmers, fishers, hunters, young people, like I mentioned earlier, stopping the crisis of irregular migration. I myself was at a point at the verge of migrating to Europe, but I discovered that from the little garden and forest that I had, I could harvest and sell little products that made income to me, and that made a lot of sense to me to connect my education and that viable impact that I felt from this, as well as the compassion that I have always had in me for nature protection, for sustainability, for environmental conservation. This became a tipping point that triggered my compassion into real action, to start bringing together communities, mobilizing, creating advocacy, awareness, and bringing tangible and measurable actions on the field to see that this initiative does not remain only on white papers. It becomes a real measurable impact on the ground that changes the lives of people, brings new well-being, bring new livelihoods, opportunities, and is able to bring prosperity, not just to this limited amount of people connected to this physical geography where the Great Green Wall is being, implemented, but holistically, the biosphere benefit that it creates to mankind, to all of humanity, because for every tree planted, for every plant grown, it is a seed for peace. It is a seed for resilience. It is a seed for social cohesion. It is a seed for, a real dignity of humans. It's sparking the spirit of dignity in humanity. And these are the principles that I carry with me going on in pushing and promoting the Great Green Wall. Actually has been that wonderful platform that has enabled me to capture this essence and see so greatly how this sparks smiles in the hearts and faces of women in the communities whose lives get transformed, young people whose decisions or whose choices become actually touched. They make decisions to not become unemployed, not to become dependent, not to become tools or victims of climate migration. Migration now becomes a choice. So this, for me, really the power that has propelled my continuous passion. And so far, the Great Green Wall has gone really far. You can see a lot of projects happening in Niger, in Chad, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Cameroon, in Nigeria, in Senegal, Last week I was in Senegal. As you know, I was organizing a very large, massive group of young people together with the Irish government and the governments of Senegal and the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel and the UNDP to really bring serious more knowledge on the ground. And this, for me, is some of the milestones that we are recording in the Great Green Wall. As you can see, 25 to 30% of the Great Green Wall has been achieved. If it was not, due to passion, if we didn't have such passion, if we didn't have such commitment, we would not have achieved what the Great Green Wall has achieved so far. But I can tell you today that the Great Green Wall is a time-tested mission and a vision which we all should actually reckon with. Great progress, great development, great milestones, great impact on the ground so far.
Amazing. So love what you said about it giving people a choice. That's so important, to know you've got another choice that perhaps migrating. So Tabi, the initiative aims to restore over 1 million hectares of degraded land. Could you share some key figures or milestones that have been achieved to date? So you said 25% of the project has been completed, is that right?
Yes, 25% of the project is ongoing. And then I always tell people that we don't measure the Great Green Wall in terms of hectares of land restored. We measure the Great Green Wall, more holistically from the social impact that has been created and how the social impact is connected to the ecological or environmental impact, which I think, actually, is not the most important aspect, because so much of the land that has been restored is not only a result of trees planted, but the amount of food, security that has been created to hold back the poverty or a crisis of food insecurity, and then the amount, like I said earlier, how this is holding back the urge or the temptation for young people to migrate, the viable ecosystems that are creating holistic, viable food system opportunities where young people can harvest from their farms, they can sell, women can harvest from their farm, they can transform these products into, process or some value addition products that fetches them income. This is the most important aspect of it. Families' livelihoods have been improved. Incomes levels have risen. The access to water has actually improved, because most often some of the impacts that desertification and drought creates is a drying up of natural ecosystem services like water wells, like water springs and streams. So the restoration effort, altogether enhances recharging these lost water resources. This is a huge impact that is immeasurable, often immeasurable. It doesn't have statistical measurements, because you have to look at the social impact more than the environmental service impact that it is creating. So for me, that's why I put it that it is 25 to 30%, because most often the measurements are tied to the amount of trees planted, the amount of lands restored. Yes, this is very important, but I can tell you also that so much of the land has been restored more than it is even recorded. If you go to Niger, you see new oases that have been created that weren't there 10 years, 15 years ago. You go to Chad now, you can see in very huge scale, the revival of lands that were previously very dry, very deserted, and completely unproductive. They are now producing food, producing crops for families to fetch food to eat and also food to sell in the market, which is completely connecting the dots in the economies of this region, where we principally rely on agriculture and agricultural services for well-being, for income and livelihood. Yeah,
I really love that you're bringing the social aspect of it, because I don't think, forcefully, that's not the first thing people tend to talk about when we talk about the Great Green Wall, because you see this mass of green basically in Africa. But you're very right, we can't separate social change and environmental change. The two are linked, and it's also about tackling poverty, tackling hunger, that type of things, and it's just so important. So let's talk about both aspects anyway. For people like me who are not in the details and the day-to-day of it like you are, can you explain how does the Great Green Wall specifically address the challenges of desertification in the Sahel region? Because I think it's one of the core objectives of it.
Yeah, specifically, it actually targets key aspects of the intersection with environment, livelihoods, and social existence, right? And for instance, farmers need productive land to grow crops. Efforts are being made to revive the productivity of the land so the farmers can grow more food on productive land. We need water to grow crops on those productive lands. So a lot of effort is being made to actually recharge some of the lost water resources and also to conserve and protect some of the existing ones so that there is more access to water to help the productive agricultural lands to produce quality and good and enough food for the people. And alongside that, there is a connection with the sustainability of the productive land, like the requirement for nitrogen. That's where the connection of agroforestry comes in, and the Great Green Wall is working very hugely in all the countries to create agroforestry measures and techniques that can help sustain productivity of the lands through planting trees that are nitrogen fixing or have high quality nitrogen fixing. But alongside, we also need pollinators and dispersers like birds and bees. So this connection of agroforestry again is also emphasizing on the restoration or restorative aspect of this connection, bringing bee production and protecting the areas where the bees thrive, their habitats, and also helping to protect the habitats of the birds and the bats and some of the wildlife, because they help very strongly in the pollination and the dispersing of seeds and pollen, which is also connected to how productive the land will be and how much the land can produce the food. So that aspect also has to work with the aspect of the protection of other primary assets that people in those communities live with, because we don't only have farmers who are growing crops or growing food, we also have hunters who rely on wildlife as their own primary preoccupation and source of income and well-being. So the protection of these landscapes where wildlife access is available for these stakeholders is important and a very big priority in the Great Green Wall, and this is ongoing in all the communities. Also, the fishers, the small streams need to have the fish life, the aquatic life that not only supports the families to have food or fish as food, but also to have fish, crabs, springs, and other aquatic life as income resources. So the protection of these streams and these lakes and bodies of water that provide this kind of resources are some of the priorities that we are also engaging in the Great Green Wall as key assets to maintain that big mosaic of ecosystem that we are talking about, because without these dots connected, that mosaic will just be a monoculture forest that does not create the viable opportunities, the viable beauty, the viable biodiversity, resources and assets that the people need, wildlife need, nature itself need. And I can tell you very categorically recently an experience that we are having in Nigeria now. So many birds are migrating from Europe. They usually migrate from Europe and they go straight to Southern Africa. But recently we are seeing these migratory birds actually stopping in the Sahel right now and perching there, spending some time and helping also to pollinate and disperse seeds and improve the state of agriculture in this region. So there is a lot about these whole processes that we are engaging in, and so much of it is beyond just planting or conserving trees.
Yeah, totally. I just love your bringing it to life like this to us, because when I think of the sheer scale of the project and so many countries involved, but as you rightly said, ecosystems, we need to remember everything is connected as well, and it's not as easy as said, let's regreen Africa, right? So thank you for that, Tabi. In what ways also does the initiative empower local communities, if we dive a bit deeper in this, especially in terms of job creation and sustainable agriculture?
So, as I was saying, Ingrid, there is a strong aspect of the social connect, social impact, and social livelihood improvement, which is at the core of the Great Green Wall Initiative. There is no point planting trees that do not help enhance the dignity of people. There is no point restoring land when it does not have a social impact on the people. So all this social impact is connected with how much people can derive from the products of the plants. Like I said, we can now today see women harvesting baobab leaves to process them into food for their families and to sell some in the market. We have this connection of cooperatives, women groups, groups of young people and networks that are now engaged in new shoots of social enterprise development that are producing maybe the derivatives from baobab trees, from moringa trees, from, sesame on the field, and a lot of other crops that are high valued crops. Most of them are found in the Great Green Wall, and these crops have great value in the market. Take, for instance, cashew. There's a lot of cashew trees grown in the Great Green Wall, from Guinea to Senegal to Burkina Faso to Nigeria, Cameroon, and Chad. Imagine if you see cashew in Europe, most of it comes from this region. If you see tamarindos in Europe or wherever you see in any part of the world, it comes from the Sahel region. And these are some of the products that we are focusing on producing them, enhancing them, conserving them, promoting them, so that these crops and products can continually create a sustainable source of good food and good income for young people, for women, for the herders, for the farmers, for the hunters, and for the fishers, and all the community entirely, because these are the resources of this region. And the resources of this region must create impact in the lives of the people. So the social enterprise aspect is very important. There is no point growing moringa if it doesn't have, if its fruits
It
do
needs
not
to have
have food.
a name.
There is no point, conserving or protecting the baobabs if they cannot create income for the people. So that's why we are focusing on these high valued crops, which actually have lots of pharmaceutical value, lots of food value, cosmetic value, food nutritional value. So this is what we are encouraging women and young people and the cooperatives and enterprises that we are actually supporting to develop in this region to grow more, to produce more, to add value to these, so that this becomes the sources of income and the sources of food, and of course the sources of health, good health. You need productive people to till the soil. You need productive people to make a good population. You need productive people to think well. You need healthy people to be productive people at the same time. So that's this connection entirely. If people are not healthy, the land will not be healthy. If the land is not healthy, the people will not be healthy. And if the land is healthy and the people are healthy, then there's productivity that comes from the land that helps both the people and helps the land itself. So there is this real strong connect with these aspects of nature and people and health and productivity and sustainability that we actually promote in this whole implementation of the Great Green Wall, which I think perhaps the world really needs to understand, especially the way we are bringing indigenous knowledge native knowledge, citizen science into unlocking some of these potentials that are often not unlocked. But what is even more mesmerizing, Ingrid, is the fact that one of my roles has been to promote how to unlock the hidden potentials, to unlock the stranded assets that we have in this region, because so much of it has been laid stranded, so much of it is hidden, and we are actually letting the people, letting it loose, sparking that potential, sparking those resources, those opportunities, so that it actually creates what you were asking, the social impact, income, nutritional food, source of health, and of course, to be able to keep the global need for products that comes from the Sahel and the Sahara region going.
Yeah, I really love that you insist on this because it's about the value it creates for everybody. And sometimes that is missing in the environmental movement, talking more about the value it creates and making that very clear. So how does the project work between all the countries? Is there a strong cooperation? How does that element work?
Yeah, the African Union is the custodian of the Great Green Wall Initiative. And the African Union has always provided strong political leadership and strong coordination mechanism, which helps steer the way the countries actually implementing the Great Green Wall Initiative. And the African Union is working in collaboration with the countries, global partners, and the frontline institutions and organizations or movements like the 1 billion trees for Africa, to actually bring real-time coordination, action, and implementation on the ground.
Yeah. So is there a specific place where this African Union is, or how is it organized?
Yes, of course. The African Union has a couple of other frameworks and institutional arrangements that helped in coordinating the Great Green Wall, from the headquarters in Addis Ababa to the country governments, where each country has a national agency that helps in coordinating the national activities, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, and also reporting on the progress of the Great Green Wall.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying this. So you were talking of migration earlier. Could you elaborate on how the project contributes to regional peace and security by addressing the root causes of migration, but also conflict?
Thank you, Ingrid. Most often we miss out, or we get misguided perspectives on the root causes of this migration and that nexus with peace and security. There is just a slight difference between somebody whose house is burning and somebody who lives in a house that is not burning but doesn't have food to eat, right? And there is no limit to how desertification and drought and the effects of climate change are hampering on communities. So when communities get heat, because they are the most hard hit, and when they get heat, maybe their streams are drying up, their springs for drinking water is drying up, the land gets too dry, they can't cultivate crops, and perhaps also the heat itself becomes unbearable. They have to move, they have to find new grounds, they have to find new places. So sometimes we really don't address the root causes of the migration or the irregular migration, and even the causes of conflicts and insecurity. So imagine this absence or this scarcity, and in the midst of people who want food on their table. Children want food on their table, mothers want food on their table, parents want food on their table. Families want to eat, communities want to live life like every other person everywhere in the world. But the weather is unbearable. The springs are dried. The rivers that produces them fish and produce water for their home chores is drying up. The forest is completely losing its stability and viability. The soil is unproductive. They have to move. And the little resources that are available become a source of competition, and often fierce competitions, not healthy competitions, which now leads to violence because many people, for little resources. You can imagine that. This is just natural, you know. It's like a small corridor, for 1,000 people to pass within a minute. There will be a stampede. So it is the same thing that is happening. However, the Great Green Wall is working now as a solution to provide this ecological and social solution in seeing that as little as some people might imagine, that a spring drying up in a community is something negligible. It is not. A drying source of water can become a huge source of violence and conflict that can last for years. A land that is drying up and losing its fertility and viability to produce food should not be taken for granted. It should not be neglected. It should actually is a potential, for violence, for conflict. So the Great Green Wall is actually strongly pushing and advocating for these lands to be protected from these harsh climatic conditions so that well that would have dried up and created the scarcity that would have pushed people to migrate or would have pushed people to struggle fiercely and compete violently over it shouldn't happen. That becomes prevented. That young person who would have migrated across the Sahara either dying in transit or dying in the Mediterranean Sea because they are running away from this hard heat impacts from climate and the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem, they wouldn't go on that journey anymore. So the whole idea of some of the initiatives or actions in the Great Green Wall is to address these root causes. And let me just share with you practically some of the ways we have been addressing these root causes. Like perhaps you must have seen that in my track record on LinkedIn, how we've been training young people in Niger, in Chad, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and just last week in Senegal. And now I am in Lomé, Togo. The concept is to really empower young people and women on how to create viable micro enterprises from natural resources available in the Great Green Wall so that they don't become victims of violence or victims of irregular migration. When they own enterprises, some of them are learning how to conserve and add value to tomatoes so that tomatoes can be available throughout the year in a region where most of the agriculture is rain-fed and crops are grown seasonally. But now with these small micro enterprises that young people are creating to be able to make tomatoes available around the whole year is a sustainable solution to keep them away from poverty, keep them from food insecurity, and keep them from that vulnerability of migration, and of course, for them not becoming victims of violence. So this is happening as part of the solutions which the Great Green Wall is creating in this region. Mangoes are harvested or they produce seasonally. But now with this small scale value chains development that we are working on and training and empowering young people, we can have mangoes dried, and kept and conserved that can stay over a long period of time. We can have cashew actually staying and kept for a long period of time. So these are innovative ideas, all implementing the Great Green Wall such that as those trees grow, they produce, those products are actually harvested, resourced into additional products that can be on the shelves of supermarkets, that can stand the test of the off-season, that can also be available in the global market so that on one hand, we hold the vulnerabilities to migration, we hold the vulnerabilities to violence and conflicts and insecurity, and on one hand, we create jobs, on the other hand, we create social cohesion, happiness, dignity, and a beautiful life for people who also want to smile, who want to thrive, who want to feel that as humans, we can live in a world that benefits us all together. So you can see that connection of the return on investment from these resources, that it does not only create income for people, but it goes as far as enhancing that social cohesion that you and I need so much. Without social cohesion, people live in conflict. And without dignity, people live in conflict, because when you lost your dignity, there is nothing else that you live for. You've lost your life. You've lost it all. So somebody with a lost dignity, or somebody who feels that they've lost their dignity, becomes more vulnerable to violence than somebody whose dignity is protected, is enhanced, and is actually felt to be there. So that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everybody needs basics. I think also, when, for example, here in Europe, we will see products from Africa, it's good to know these stories that are behind it and also what it means, because I think one thing we really don't do enough in the world today in general is to really go beyond, I love cashews, for example. Go beyond having cashews on your plate, but knowing the story that's behind it and making the link to people who grow it, basically. That's really important, I find.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the initiative of the Great Green Wall is said to have the potential to sequester 250 million tons of carbon dioxide. So it is not insignificant in the global fight against climate change. And, when we talk of carbon sequestration, people have in mind the ocean, very rightly, the Amazon forest, the Siberian forest. There are restoration projects happening all over the world, thanks God. But how much do you think the Great Green Wall is going to contribute in the global fight against climate change? Because it does impact countries across the world in different ways. And I've been speaking about it with other guests on the podcast. And I'm really glad you're bringing your own view about what's happening in Africa, the droughts, etc., because we do need, people to tell these stories.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. I think that is also an understatement. The Great Green Wall has the potential to sequester like 20-fold more than you have stated, billions of tons of carbon, because you can imagine, just imagine these massive, massive biodiversity hubs from the Lake Chad to the Teranga lands in Senegal, from the Fouta Djallon hills in Guinea down to the Horn of Africa in Somalia and Djibouti, and currently now moving in Southern Africa. This is massive, too massive. I can tell you authoritatively that once this initiative is fully achieved, this becomes the biggest global carbon sinks the world will ever have an experience. And of course, if we do not turn our eyes and our hearts to the potentials of this initiative, we would have lost it. I am aware of the current heat that is actually plowing communities in Europe currently, very hot temperatures. But there is little understanding of how much the Great Green Wall is a solution to that.
Yeah.
From where I am in the Sahel to London, it's just about 1,000 kilometers in some places, and perhaps thousands of kilometers. Dust that you find in Europe lives from the Sahara into there. Yeah. That also means that the trees and the biodiversity that we are conserving and restoring and regenerating in the Great Green Wall region has a strong biosphere effect right in London, right in Wembley, right in Portugal, right in New York, in the United States. So why not we do it? It is not just about the carbon, but cooling down our global temperature. The solution is right here. The Great Green Wall has the solution for that. We need to cool down our global temperatures. We need to create stronger, more viable habitats for our migratory birds. We are not even thinking about that. Photographers and photojournalists are very, very poised and passionate to write about birds, to write about their migration. No one is passionate to think about where do they migrate to? What do they eat when they migrate? Where do they lay their eggs when they have to reproduce, when they have to breed the next generation? And where are these resources? The Great Green Wall has this all in one package. So it's a package for strong humanitarian safety net in the world, reducing migration, irregular migration, of course, of vulnerable young Africans who are so perhaps moved with the civilization in Europe, or that they've been pushed back or been pushed by the impinging heat and effects of drought and desertification. It has a solution to reducing conflicts in this region. It has a solution to reducing global food insecurity. I am very shocked to see that right in Europe today, some people are hungry. I am very shocked to see that currently today in America, you have people begging for food on the streets. It's also a shock and a global disgrace to all of humanity that we have a package of a natural solution that helps us address all this spot of challenges, and we are not so passionate about it. We are not aware of it. So I am using this opportunity just to say that the Great Green Wall provides this huge global opportunity to sink the carbon, to reduce the global heat, reduce global migration crisis, reduce global conflict crisis, reduce global food insecurity crisis, and the huge challenge of the geopolitical disconnect. Because most of the geopolitical crisis we are facing today or happening today is a crisis around resources. What are those resources? Natural resources. When we finish the Great Green Wall, the world will have abundance. The world will have so much that no one will be struggling on geopolitical debates about who owns what resources and who earns what resources and who gets what resources. These resources should be very much available to every part of the world. And the biggest of these resources, I say, is the food. And of course, don't forget, Ingrid, I should also say, another reason why the Great Green Wall is also very important for our future. One of the biggest threats we are having in the world, or might potentially have in the world, will be the crisis over water. And the whole Sahel region has the world's largest underground drinkable water resources. So isn't it smart that as we plant these trees, as we conserve these lands, as we regenerate this region, we are equally protecting the world's future source of drinking water, at the same time preventing the vulnerabilities to those crises that will originate from scarcity of water, my dear. So we have to understand that this Great Green Wall is not just one static event or static activity somewhere in Africa. It is a visionary concept, a novelty by African heads of states, congratulations to them, to sustain not only Africa's environment, but to protect the world's environment, hold back the vulnerabilities that could tear the world apart through just restoring these lands that we have in this region.
So interesting. Yeah, we all need to go back to nature, or at least make the connection. I can tell you in Europe, there are a lot of people who are actually going back to farming, for example. They're interested in regenerative agriculture, going back to these principles that have been passed down generations and somehow being forgotten within, industrial development. But hopefully, it's a growing movement, and that's one that you're demonstrating extremely well. So I always love to refer to the UN Sustainable Development Goals because they encompass so much, and they are like a new blueprint for humanity to tackle, the biggest issues over time. So how would you say the Great Green Wall embody the principles of the UN SDGs, and what lessons can other regions in the world learn from it?
Yes, Ingrid, I think perhaps my earlier response also answers that. The response is very strong to that because the SDG is actually geared at addressing some of the challenges of the world today and in the future. But if you look at the Great Green Wall, there are three components. We have the desert, which is an ecosystem, a unique ecosystem of its own type. We have the lakes and the rivers, which are a blue economy. These resources are all found in the Great Green Wall. And we have also, the sea, which are connected with the Great Green Wall in Senegal, in Somalia, with very long coastlines. And this is just to put in perspective a little bit of the connect with the blue economy and the green economy, the green sectors, and that in between impact that it creates. So you see food addresses the issue of poverty and hunger. Food and poverty and hunger are all addressed in the Great Green Wall. The issue, I gave the connection earlier, how young people and women are working together in cooperatives, to really create impact in their communities. You see bridging the gender gap is coming in. And I also perhaps talk to you about the recharging of water sources. There is often these stories that perhaps sometimes are exaggerated also in the Sahel, where women go 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers to fetch water. It is not far from the truth. Yes, people actually go very far to fetch water, to have access to water, and this is often done by women. But imagine when these springs and streams are recharged through this natural regeneration or restoration or rehabilitation processes. What happens? That hardship is reduced on the women, and the women who bear most often the burden on taking care of children and household chores. When this food abundance is available, this reduces that burden. It's a burden, when there is no food at home, when the farm doesn't provide sufficient food, there is that burden. So the Great Green Wall solutions that I mentioned earlier, and perhaps those that I may have omitted, are actually very viable to addressing all of the SDGs. Life in water, land, climate action. We talked about the global sink, the billions and billions of tons of carbon that will be sequestered, a huge climate action. Children having dignity, it's a huge value for the SDGs.
Totally.
Wildlife,
Definitely integrating all of them in the project, that's for sure.
The Great Green Wall addresses all the SDGs in a very intricate connection that is intriguing, that we all need to admire, we need to adore, like I mentioned earlier. You see, the circumstance of an instance that we had in Adamawa State in Nigeria, where a stream that had existed for a long time, previously there was fish. They used to have traditional catfish in those streams, but over time it got depleted because there was a lot of over-farming around it. The tree canopies around it was lost, so the water was too exposed to heat and excessive evaporation. We came there, brought some innovative ways of regenerating the surrounding of the land, the watershed, and brought back a viable ecosystem and biodiversity around it. The fish started coming back, and women were able to find time or have a productive life by fishing and eating these fishes and selling some for income. So there's a lot to the Great Green Wall that is written in the books. There's a lot to the Great Green Wall that is being told in the news. There's a lot to it than we all have even discovered. So that's why I said earlier that one of my missions is unlocking the hidden potentials of the Great Green Wall, which, if truly well unlocked, the Great Green Wall becomes the world's most powerful solution that we all should be actually enjoying from, deriving happiness from, having the best of time, the best of stories, the best of income, the best of everything. I mean, your life in Europe will be better with the Great Green Wall. I wrote a piece recently on the floods in Spain and Portugal and Italy. I said It is because the Great Green Wall has not been achieved. Once it is achieved, the southern winds, the warm ocean currents from the south, will be held somewhere in between the Sahel without reaching the Mediterranean and never reaching Europe. This is simple, common sense, practical.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, very
If we
impact it
restore the
can.
Great Green Wall, the dust storms, the amount of dust and warm air that you are feeling in Europe will be balanced, will be cooled before it reaches there. It will not even leave the region, because the trees will cover all the dust and the dust will never rise to reach where you are. And of course, imagine the amount of mental health that the heat is creating currently. The cost of mental health is too high even for our governments to bear. So the cooling of Europe will be a great thing, a great asset that the Great Green Wall brings to the entire Western Europe and of course the other side of the Atlantic. So that's why I said, Ingrid, there is a lot to the Great Green Wall than we have spoken about. There's a lot to it than we know.
And I love you're very proud of it, obviously, and so should you. So as we are learning from you today, can you also tell me what are some of the major challenges the initiative has encountered and how have they been addressed or how are they being addressed?
Yeah, I would say the initiative has really no major challenges on the ground because this is a community-led initiative. It's moving, but the only challenge has been the speed. There has been a little bit of slow speed, and the slow speed is also a result of often pledged big money that never gets to the ground. We've a lot of global pledges of big money, and this big money never gets to the beneficiaries because they have remained as pledges in the global stage, in the global podiums. Global leaders come and make pledges. And then the second big challenge is the fact that there's a lot of misguided understanding or misguided perspective around the Great Green Wall. Some people around the world think the Great Green Wall is a solution just for Africa. People might think it's an African business, but it is the world's business.
Yeah,
It is
totally.
all our business. It's a humanity's business. So this slowness or perhaps this misconception of the Great Green Wall is a challenge itself that is also limiting the Great Green Wall, because if we all held our hands, if we all could put little effort, little money from all citizens of the earth, we complete this initiative in 5 years. It's as simple as that. Everybody in the world makes the Great Green Wall achievable and makes our world better.
So talking of timing, or timeline, if we look ahead, what is your vision for the Great Green Wall in the next decade?
Let's plant 1 billion trees. Let's plant 1 billion trees in the Great Green Wall. From the West Coast to the East Coast, let's create thousands and millions of micro enterprises for young people so that they should not migrate across the Mediterranean or across the Atlantic. Let us recharge all the water resources in the Great Green Wall. Let us recharge the Lake Chad and take it back to where it used to be in the 1980s. It has lost 60% of its water body. Let us recharge it. Let us create global support, global collaboration, global solidarity for the Great Green Wall so that it becomes an example of humans' ability and capability to collaborate and solve world's problems. This is my vision for the Great Green Wall.
Okay, very good. So you did mention 1 billion trees, and you are the CEO of 1 billion trees for Africa, right? So can you tell us, so is it something that totally links back to the Great Green Wall, or is it like an independent organization? And what is the core mission of this initiative?
The core mission of the initiative is to restore the Great Green Wall.
Okay.
The core mission of this, yes, the 1 billion trees for Africa is a movement of communities supporting the Great Green Wall, working to achieve the Great Green Wall, to make the Great Green Wall a reality, because there are people around Africa, the governments, have made commitments, but you need the people who go to the ground and make it happen. So 1 billion trees for Africa is that movement that is catalyzing action on the ground, making sure that for every resource is connected to a tangible and measurable action that gets the trees on the ground, that get the micro enterprises started, that gets the women connected to the services and actions that they needed to do, and of course bridging the gaps and creating that solidarity for the implementation of this initiative.
Okay, so I actually love that you are going back to people, because having a great vision is obviously great, but then it's how do you make it happen? So can you tell us, how do you engage with local communities to ensure the success of the tree planting effort? Is the initiative very well received by people in general?
Yeah. The local communities are the custodians of this initiative. They own the land, they own the forest, they own the communities. So what we're doing is to give them the sovereignty. They have also knowledge and wisdom that has been held, traditional wisdom, indigenous knowledge that they have held over time. So they are the custodians of this initiative, and they are the custodians of the processes. What we are doing with them is to connect the dots so that this knowledge can be a catalyst for social change. It can also be that knowledge that helps them enhance their capacities to transform these resources into social and economic gains for themselves. But most importantly, we are that interfacing platform or movement, making sure that we connect the world to these communities, connect the world to what the communities are doing, and connect the communities to the world. And of course, we're working directly with the communities in making sure that everything is done, monitored, evaluated, and resourced in the right way that it benefits the communities. The communities don't have all the capacities they need. We help in improving that capacity. Communities sometimes don't know how to create the cooperatives to resource their natural resources that are in this region. We help them to do that. Communities sometimes don't understand some of the modern techniques to conserve, restore, or rehabilitate, or even regenerate the land. We support in this effort. Of course, bringing science, bringing technology, bringing innovation. And of course, something I needed to mention, which is very important, is the era of new technology. Most communities don't know how to use this technology, so we're also there to making sure that this technology is well used by communities, and communities are not also exploited by big money, by big projects, by big programs, and also making sure that for every dollar that is meant for the Great Green Wall, meant for communities, we are supporting the communities so that this actually provides the value for which that dollar is meant.
So one question, are there any particular techniques that are being used when planting trees for agroforestry? Or here in Europe, for example, we've seen these images of kind of half moon techniques. I don't know if that speaks to you, but that's what we see when people talk about the Great Green Wall of Africa. So are there any particular techniques that are being developed and implemented?
Yes, there are so many techniques. We've seen solar irrigations that have been installed in Niger, in Chad, in Burkina Faso. These are very innovative technologies that have been used. We've seen greenhouses that are coming up in this region. We've seen vertical farms that are emerging in these regions. Just last week, we were teaching young people in Senegal vertical farming, how to introduce vertical farming in the agriculture, because some of them don't have equitable access to land. Some of them don't have sufficient land, and some women. So they can use vertical farming to address that challenge.
Okay, perfect. So you are also, Tabi, an environmental outreach consultant for the UN Environment Programme. So can you tell us what are your primary responsibilities?
Yes, I think in all I have mentioned, my primary responsibilities actually comes out in that I want the Great Green Wall to succeed. I'm mobilizing communities. I am making outreach for communities and also connecting passion, making the great people working the Great Green Wall more passionate to see the hidden potentials in the Great Green Wall, to see the Great Green Wall beyond food, to see it beyond water, to see it beyond trees, to see it just beyond canopy, to realize their far-reaching impact and benefits of the Great Green Wall and how collaborative work can create more impact, and of course discovering also how to make every resource in the Great Green Wall a potential for dignity, a potential for happiness, a potential for social cohesion, a potential for enhancing peace, climate resilience, and security in this region.
Yeah. So I also want to mention, Tabi, that you have received several accolades, including the 2017 Africa Prize for Climate Information Services Innovation. So what do these recognitions mean to you, and how have they influenced your work?
Yeah, I think really the beautiful accolades and recognitions, to me, they actually spur me more. They give me more zeal, actually inform me that what I'm doing is something worthwhile. And I feel sometimes like a musician who is singing on stage, and once he's applauded, the spirit, it actually improves the spirit of singing. So this actually, it inflames my spirit more. It gives me more energy, more positive energy to really ride on and carry on, because I think this is a cause of humanity. And most importantly, I feel really rewarded, and I'm grateful for that.
That's great to hear. I actually always feel even more motivated every time I have a conversation with one of my guests, because I think it's the interaction as well that really matters, to bring things to life and also to give hope, to see what all the great things that everybody is doing across the world. We really need to share that more, isn't it? So I wanted to reflect on leadership a little bit with you with the next question, because you are a formidable leader as part of the Great Green Wall project. So what does leadership mean to you in the context of environmental conservation and community development? Because you have this very much at heart, as we've understood.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really beautiful. Like I said earlier, I feel really grateful that I am able to lead, and I always see myself as a servant, as a steward. That is being, I am here to provide services to the people, to actually provide stewardship to communities, not as a leader, but as a servant of the people. So it might have different ways to call it, but for me, I see myself as a servant and as a steward, just bringing stewardship. And I'm really very happy that this has humbled me even more. I'm really truly grateful about that. And communities often are very smart, wise, and appreciative, very appreciative. Each time you see something happen, a little action happens with communities, you just imagine the gratitude that people walk up to you with. Sometimes marveling. It really humbles one, and I feel most time that I am actually fortunate and grateful to be in the role that I am playing as a servant, as a steward to communities, serving and making the Great Green Wall a reality.
But a great vision of leadership. Yeah. For me, it is the same. I would definitely say being of service to the world, being of service. I think that's just the most important, and that gives you purpose. But when you see the results of impact it can have, like you do with your communities, it must be so rewarding. So, Tabi, we are nearing the end of the podcast. I've got 2 more questions for you. One which is quite open. What message would you like to convey to our global audience about the importance of environmental initiatives like the Great Green Wall and 1 billion trees for Africa.
Yeah, the most important message I would send to the world is that we should never underestimate the importance of little impacts on the ground. One tree planted can create a huge impact on the ground. One well recharged, one spring recharged, one stream recharged can create a huge holistic benefit to humanity as a whole. Because when one person is happy here in the Sahel, it sparks, it connects to the entire global happiness or the happiness of humanity. And I want to tell the world that one life of a woman or one life of a young man vulnerable to migration that is being hurt or that is dying from the impact of climate change, the impact of desertification, or the impact of drought, or any of these related impacts, it is one life too much. So no amount of support, no amount of action is small to address this challenge, because these challenges are preventable. These challenges are manageable. These challenges can actually be held from their root sources so that they don't happen. Most importantly, we have to see ourselves as a human family and see the Great Green Wall and the 1 billion Trees for Africa initiative that is implementing this beautiful nature wonder as a moral responsibility to each one of us to support it, to make it a reality.
What a great, great, great message. I love what you said about there is nothing small, no small story. It is so true. I just want to give a quick example because this week I actually did a post on LinkedIn about the rehabilitation of, I think, 20 blue parrots in Brazil. And the post went viral and people just loved that story and the feedback was just so positive, because it was giving something positive, hope to people, showing them that conservation can happen. And, it took time to get to that point. But it is this small stories that are actually not that small because they really connect with people. And all I can hope for the Great Green Wall project is that you guys, you share all your small stories that are positive and, build progress in the world, because we do need these stories, as small or as big as they are.
I accept with you, Ingrid. And just very, very importantly to note is the fact that, you see, I was mentioning about, from little money, little resources, we created over 100 jobs for young people in Niger last year, 2004.
Amazing.
In the same year, we've created 117 micro enterprises that are working on the value chains, agroforestry value chains, that are implementing the Great Green Wall and helping to provide some of the world's most required high-valued products. Some of the value chains are working on moringa value chains. Some are working on baobab value chains. Some are working on tomato value chain. Some are working on tamarindus value chain. Some are working on hibiscus value chain. And take, for instance, the young lady who came to the training with a pregnancy of a baby she was about to deliver in 2 months. And she was passionate about joining this capacity development program. And I felt she was vulnerable. But she proved to be one of the best case studies that we have today, because in her zeal, 7 months pregnant, in attending a workshop to learn knowledge on how to transform little opportunities in her own context into viable opportunities. Today, Maimuna is processing tomatoes from her community and putting it on the shelves of supermarkets in Niger. Maimuna is transforming mangoes into processed mangoes that are actually available all around the season. And there's another case of Sakina, another young lady who said she had a dream to grow a local chicken, because local chickens are grown on open fields. And she had no money, but the training and the small micro grants that we gave her started, making her dream to come true. Today, Sakina has over 1,000 local chicken that she's growing. And from the chicken droppings, she's collecting and making small gardening where she grows vegetables that she's supplying to the local market.
Wow.
This is just one little case study in Niger. And in Burkina Faso, we had these young ladies who also grow a lot of rice and a lot of beans and a lot of other crops in their communities. This training on value chains development was able to change their lives. One of them just realized how well you could take granite when the granite is much in the season and process it into granite paste that can be consumed in hotels, in restaurants, and can be sold on the shelves of supermarkets, where somebody can buy it all the way from Burkina Faso to Europe or to America or to Asia, or even from Burkina Faso to Cameroon or to Nigeria or to South Africa. Another case study in Mali, where Aminata Jakite is actually helping in conserving cashew value chain, the cashew nuts. And she's been able to resource cashew nuts from their primary source into value addition state, and these cashews are available in supermarkets today. Tell me how this young person will want to migrate somewhere. Tell me, what was the genesis? It is a connection with the opportunity that is residing in their community. If we never taught them how to discover these opportunities, they would never have believed or think that there are opportunities in their communities. So there is a huge job. Why we need this global collaboration and cooperation is to be able to catalyze these hidden potentials, these hidden opportunities, and hold back this critical mass of young people who have huge positive energy in them, but don't have the opportunity to explore it. Let's create that avenue for them to discover these opportunities and the avenue for them to exploit their positive energy and turn it into a productive, innovative, and positive force for social change and development in their communities, rather than them turning it into a negative energy that can cause violence. You see, this nexus is very important to really diagnose and talk about it. If you see young people crossing the boats in the English across the English Channel, not that some of them are not talented, they have lost hope, and they lost hope because they lost dignity, and they lost dignity because the land could not provide on one hand, and they could not understand the opportunities that are there. So you can see ignorance happening on one hand, and the declines created by climate change happening on the other hand, creating a friction or a spark of negative circumstances or impact, as well as migration, as violence or conflict or unemployment or whatever. Our solution, planting the 1 billion trees to restore the Great Green Wall, is a great initiative. It's a great journey. It's a huge global social and moral responsibility that we all must be behind. We need to create this impact. One young person, 1 square kilometer, 1 square meter after the other, restoring the land and restoring hope. This is how we can reduce those vulnerabilities. This is how we can reduce the pressures on cities and communities in Europe. People wake up in the morning and see new strangers from somewhere. These are people that have lost hope. People wake up in the morning and hear there is violence in that community. These people fighting are people who have lost hope. If you have hope, you will never pick a gun to fight. So the biggest mission, our moral responsibility and obligation, is to support these processes so that we can give everybody hope. Hope, hope, hope for food, for peace, for sustainability, hope for climate resilience, hope for human, social, humanity coexistence. This is very important to all of us.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, what a great message to
That's what we're
finish.
doing.
Yeah, I love an image you used earlier of, you're building a mosaic. And thank you for the stories, the case studies you shared with us, because that's really what brings it to life. And you're building this mosaic of positive stories, things are happening. And, the picture is getting bigger and bigger over time. And that's absolutely fantastic to see this. So last question to you, Tabi. This podcast is called Shades of Life, with the idea that we each hold the power to paint life with our own colors to leave a meaningful imprint on the planet. So I always end the podcast with the same question for the guest and for you today. If you were a color, what would it be and why? And it can be anything you want and for any reason you want.
First, I want to thank you perhaps for bringing such a concept. But if you know very well, my colors, I have not one color, I have two colors. And my colors are the colors of hope, green and blue. We need our blue sky to remain blue with beautiful clouds because we have restored the land and kept the dust that pollutes our skies and our rivers, which are blue. We need our land to be green so that the beauty of the land can invigorate and spark hope, which brings real shades of life, or shades, the most beautiful shades you can expect, which this concept and this postcard is all about. So we want shades of hope. Let the shades bring hope. Let the shades bring peace. Let the shades bring prosperity. Let them bring harmony and social cohesion that can really stop people from becoming victims of mental health, victims of violence, victims of poverty, victims of hunger. All these things are artificial. Nature has abundance for everyone. Nature has the shades for everyone suffering from the heat of the excruciating climate change. Nature has beautiful shades for people to sit by beautiful streams and rivers and lakes in their communities and enjoy the shades of the sunset and even the sunrise. And nature has provided the beautiful shades, for people to be able to have the food that they love to eat. So let the shades be multiple, but the shades should bring hope. Hope and hope and hope should be the result of the shades. So let that shade, if there is any color that is called hope, let that color, that is the color that I choose for the shades.
Amazing, Tabi. Thank you for that. That's beautiful. So, Tabi, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast and for your brilliant messages. I've loved to learn more about the Great Green Wall through your eyes, because that's what you do day in, day out. And, the progress already since it started has been amazing. And I wish you and all the communities who are working on it the best. You have the eyes of the world on you for this project, and I think that's a beautiful thing for Africa.
And I call you, Ingrid, to make a commitment to how many trees you will be planting.
Yes.
Do you want to make
My dad is a botanist, so I have literally spent my childhood in gardens with him. So that type of project really speaks to me.
That's amazing.
So thank you so much, Tabi. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening today. And I hope you've been very inspired, as I've been with Tabi and this project. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Ingrid, and thank you very much for promoting the Great Green Wall. You are also our ambassador for the Great Green Wall. So
Yes,
all the
totally.
best for you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Good.